Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new Redefining CyberSecurity podcast here on ITSPmagazine, or more specifically, a new episode of the CISO Circuit Series with my good friend, Michael Piacente. How are you, Michael?
Good to see you, Sean.
Yeah, good to see you too. And we have a distinguished guest today, Betsy, and I'll let you do the honors. But for many who know the show, I get to talk with all kinds of cool people, and Michael. No, I'm kidding. And now where we look at the role of cybersecurity in business and the roles in cybersecurity that enable the programs in the business. And for me, the ultimate goal is to operationalize technology, operationalize security programs, and enable the business to grow and succeed successfully, safely, I should say. And it's not an easy task, especially with a lot of the pressures of attacks and threats and compliance that keeps coming up, and all the work associated with that. And I think other parts of the business. So the role doesn't stand on its own, right? We work with other teams, and we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between the CIO and the CSO/CISO. So Michael, any thoughts you want to share to kick things into gear?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge convergence going on between these two functions. I feel like it comes up in literally every day of my conversations, both with CISOs and CIOs, but also with clients. And what are the functions? How are they dissected? A lot of it depends on the size and shape of the company, the industry, where they are in their journey. So we certainly can double click on that. And I think Betsy has probably the best perspective, having done it before, having talked to many companies in that space. So I'm excited to hear her perspective.
Yeah. And so for those who don't know Betsy, maybe a few words from you about some of the things you worked on and what you're up to now, and what prompted you to join us for this. I'm honored to have you on.
No, thank you so much, Sean and Michael, for hosting me. I've been looking forward to this ever since Michael floated the idea. So starting off with your first question, just about my background, it's been almost a little bit over 20 years, which sounds crazy saying that because it's been a wild ride. But I started off working, as many people in security did when we were coming up. That's how I refer to it as, in the data center and help desk. So that was my background. At the time when I went to school in Buffalo, New York, I'm originally from Nairobi, Kenya. Went to school in Buffalo, New York. I was on a path when I was in Kenya to be a lawyer, but I fell in love with computers. And I'm so glad I did, because, things ended up working out as they have today. And so started off data center work, help desk work, cable industry. And then I met a professor who was, I went to a Jesuit college in Buffalo, New York, Nairobi to Buffalo. And she was doing moonlighting work with the FBI on cybercrime. And she introduced a course in cybersecurity. And the moment, I took one of her classes, I knew that was it. I knew that this was exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And so, fast forward, it was difficult to find jobs in security because the role, even today, is still in its early stages. And so spent some time, living in Buffalo, New York. I worked in a number of industries, healthcare. I was in an insurance company. That's actually where I got my first CISO role, was a health insurance company. And then, I was born in the tropics. I'm solar powered, I like to tell people. And so after 10 years of Buffalo winters, by then I was married, and I looked at my husband and I said, I think it's time for us to try a different environment where I don't hibernate during the winter. Or dig out of snow. And so we went out west, and this was after, remember the housing crisis. So it wasn't very clear. It was a very uncertain time. And that's, we sold our house and then just move into an apartment because it was still the West Coast and we just didn't know whether it was going to work out. So I went to work at eBay. I was running their risk program. eBay and PayPal were still together at that time. And I had a really interesting role. So eBay and PayPal had grown by M&A. And by the time I got there, they had about 35 little companies all over the world that they had acquired. And the security posture in each one of these was sort of like very opaque. And so I was brought in to build out a standard by which you could measure out the security risks for all of these. They called them adjacencies at the time. Loved that job, got to meet and work with many amazing people. And then Facebook came calling. And from there, I think that's where I learned the most about what it means to build a security program in a high threat environment. And so think of everything. By the time I joined Facebook, I think we were looking at the monthly active users. I forget, maybe it was around 600,000 monthly active users. By the time I left, it was over 1.2 billion. They had acquired WhatsApp, Oculus, and I got to be on the front lines of watching and building out security capabilities for some of these acquired companies. So at Facebook, I ran the security assurance program, which is basically all of the SOC 2 work, any of the things that fell between regulatory work and technology work. So that was really cool. And then towards the end, I worked on operations, which is I run a team of program managers, and anything that security team was involved in, we had our hands in. We were sort of like the nucleus of the security team. And so after I spent about 4 years there, I started thinking about moving. My husband and I started thinking about moving back east because our families are all located here. People are getting older. We, by then, had 2 children, and we looked at each other and said, "What are we doing? We love the West Coast, but it's time to go back east." And I said, New York is a really interesting place to go. I'm interested in fintech, and it's funny, I did not get into fintech right away. I got into a a medical device company that was digitizing ultrasound. You would connect, and the company's name is Butterfly, and they have a really cool product where you literally connect an ultrasound probe onto an iPhone, and you as a doctor out in the field don't have to wait for a bulky machine. And so, to me, that was sort of the best interaction of you're finding a product that is helping to change lives, as well as having all of these complex problems, because you have regulation, you've got hardware security, you've got, there's a cloud backend, you've got AI. Nobody was talking about AI back then as they are today, but all of these things were coming together. And I thought, wow, this is a really interesting company. So I was there, helped them build out their security program, their IT program. And then I got this incredible opportunity to build out another security function, this time in blockchain and crypto. And that was Chainalysis. So I wrapped up my time at Chainalysis in January. And now what I'm doing is advising startups. I also co-founded my own startup doing incident response in primarily East Africa, although we're starting to see some interest in the US with more smaller shops. So that was a long, drawn out way, but I hope you got sort of like the story of where we, how I got to where I am today.
Betsy, by the way, I've sort of heard bits and pieces of the story. I've had the pleasure of knowing Betsy for about 7 years, I think, 6 or 7 years. And I love that story. It's just such an inspiring story. First of all, a couple of things I wanted to point out. First of all, Betsy's first CIO role, I believe it was with the healthcare company. It was like one of the first HMOs, right, in New York. that was only about 5 or 6 years into your career, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes, that's very accurate. Yeah.
Which for those out there, a lot, and I work with a lot of folks whose end goal is to be the CISO, and sometimes it comes later in the career, sometimes it comes earlier. And in Betsy's case, it came earlier. The opportunity is there, and she took the most, took most of the opportunity and really built upon her career in a totally different industry, and then was able to pivot into basically, to eBay and PayPal, which is a very different industry, but probably equally, or maybe as not, governance wise, be able to. So every step along the way with Betsy, she used previous experience and then grew. And I always look for that from a candidate perspective, from a leader perspective. It's actually a wonderful story. The other thing that I will give you the humble pie piece on is that, at Facebook, you were pretty much one of the leaders under Alex Stamos and that team. That's kind of how I met you and heard about you and your amazing reputation, your humanity. And so that was probably one of the largest scaled environments on the planet at that time, if not the largest. So I was just love to kind of get your thoughts. Like, when you're working at a FANG at that level at that time, is there some nuance in surviving and working and growing yourself during that time any experiences that you could take away from that you wanted to share?
That's a great question. And thank you for putting it the way you did, because you made me sound like, this genius who was very strategic, but in reality, it was a number of just steps and people. I think I can't underscore. There are people who took, I call it, they took a risk on me, because going into the Bay Area, I was only about 3 years into eBay when Facebook came calling, and so it was, at that time, most people in security were not thrilled with the idea of a Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. I just want to put that out there, because, and it's for all of the reasons that we still, worry about today, where there's just a lot of personal data that we're sharing. And so there was all sorts of things that went into that decision to join Facebook. But your question was around, how do you survive or thrive in that situation, or in an environment like that? And it really goes down to the culture. Before Alex and I, great friends. There was Joe Sullivan, also another friend of mine. I think they built an environment in which we knew that the work that we were doing was difficult, but we also knew the work we were doing was having an impact. There's tons of really great stories that have come out of that security team. The other thing is the innovation. I sat next to a number of people who just created tools. They were hobbyists, so they would create these security tools, and they were beautiful. They were very elegant. So we had something called Security Bot, where if data was being accessed, maybe there were some issues and there was a red flag that somebody was accessing this data, Security Bot would pop up and interact with you. These are things that today, we're seeing more and more of that being built out. But at the time at Facebook, there were people who were just so talented and so passionate and were able to just create or invent really elegant solutions to security, and understanding that we had to lean on our partners. It wasn't just a, security team versus the entire organization. No, we ended up building lots of really strong relationships. I ran a program called Hacktober, which was, I would say, probably one of the best marketing tools for the security team at Facebook. Mm-hmm. And I've taken that playbook into other companies where, at Chainalysis, I created Cryptober, which is a riff on Hacktober. But the idea is, you create a fun environment during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And it's not just about phishing people and making people embarrassed, that they clicked on a link. At Facebook, it was interesting things like leaving USB sticks just around the campus. It was movie nights, bringing in, people could bring in their families and giving away swag. It was just, we created a really great culture and environment where people felt comfortable raising security issues with us. We had different channels where people could reach out to us if they suspected something, and built that idea of a partnership versus sometimes you can have, and I'm not saying that, it was all roses the entire time, but at least when you can connect to people on that level, on that human level, you're here, I respect, I empathize what you're doing. Here's what we're trying to do. Let's figure out a way to make this work. And so I think a lot of those lessons that I picked up from Facebook made it such that, yes, the environment was tough. It was very busy, but it was a lot of fun.
That's great. Yeah. And by the way, one thing I just learned about you is you're really good at the marketing of names. When I come up with a product, they're like terrible. Like where did I even come up with that? So Cryptober is pretty awesome.
Thank you. Maybe I'll go into marketing with this.
Yeah.
Work out.
I'm with you on that. I now know who to call when I have a good idea, but no idea.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
But it is true. I mean, one thing for people like take away from this is, it's not so much always about the company that you work for that you're helping to build a security organization, but the security culture in that company is what also drives your own personal growth, but also drives your ability to make your management track or your architecture track, whatever it is, because the enablement of that culture is key. And you worked for two of the more extraordinary security programs in the world. eBay is widely known as a CISO factory to the extent, and CIO factory, as is Facebook. And the extraordinary people, Joe and Alex, can call friends as well, and they're amazing. And so it's pretty fantastic to see that. And then you being able to take that and apply those lessons learned, the mistakes that everyone made, and then the growth opportunities into your own organizations when you're building out Butterfly and Chainalysis. So it's a really cool story, and a unique one. So
thank you.
Yeah, neat. Sorry, Sean, I'm capitalizing.
No, this is fantastic. As you were describing some of your journey, I was thinking that's a story on its own. That's a story. we could
go down many rabbit holes.
I want to maybe go to this point of, I'm going to stick with the culture, because did it exist, the culture, or was it something that you helped shape? Because I can't recall a time when somebody said the security tool was beautiful. Right? And it's something that they created, and they had the freedom to do those things. And if anybody listening to the show is listening to this episode, they'll realize that many times I'll say, when is security going to have its transformational moment? When can it shine as a place where it actually drives business value? And if the team feels good and the tools coming from it are good and the programs are operating within it are good, I think it has to be good for the organization. So my question is, the culture that allowed the team to be creative and be innovative and feel good about the work that they're doing, did that exist? Did you help shape it? How did that come around?
That's a great question. How did it come around? So I joined Facebook in 2011, and part of the onboarding process, if I'm thinking, it feels like it was forever ago, but sometimes these memories come back to me. And I remember it felt like there were no restrictions once you got into the company about where your passions and where you could spend your time. So, and what I mean by that is, when you're going through onboarding, especially as an engineer at Facebook, and I don't know if it's the same for other of these FANG companies, but you go through something called boot camp. And the idea there is like for you to learn, because it's a massive code base, so they just don't throw you into the wolves, but you have to go through this process. But, and depending on what role you are or you were going into, you had a few different paths, but there were some things that were very specific, and they were around some of the actual Facebook culture itself. So I think and that culture itself is just, around, the word hacking was thrown around a lot, but not hacking in the security sense. It was finding a better way to do something, being more efficient, being more effective, and not being afraid to do it. So you would walk around the campus and there would be posters. What would you do if you were not afraid? That's a big one by Sheryl Sandberg. And I think people really lived those values. So we essentially took the company values and infused them into the security program so that we wouldn't look, because, depending on the industry you're in, the security team can sometimes, it can sometimes feel like you're isolated because you're holding your hand up saying, no, let's put the brakes on this. But if you then, flip that on its head and say, no, we're just like the entire company. We also like to hack. We also like to build things. And that just gave people the courage, I guess, that they needed to go out and get creative. And also performance review processes also had a place to play here, where you were rewarded on the impact that you had. So that word was everywhere. I'm starting to remember some posters on the wall, fix more and whine less. So that was just the environment. If you find something that's broken, figure it out. Another example I'll give you is, I had there were opportunities, if you were interested, where you could go and work on other teams. And so I decided, when Facebook was rolling out internet.org, which is was a very bold idea to get the entire world connected. But that's the kind of environment that these companies are built in. But they were expanding into Kenya, into East Africa, and I'm from Kenya. And so I created a pitch. I went to the growth team and I said, I want to learn how you're building partnerships, how you grow and scale out products on the ground. Spoke to my manager and he said, yeah, that sounds great. Go do that. And I went and did that for 6 months. This stuff doesn't happen in your, everyday company. And I know that what I'm describing is sort of like, the perfect case where you have so much talent and you can move people around where the interests take them, and yet you still have the operations going, right? That some of the bigger consulting companies will do that, but it's not easy to do for every company. But the ones that figure out how to do it, I think, sort of like build that into their DNA, and that's where the creativity starts to show up.
So go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to mention from a recruiting perspective, I guess, as the simplest way to say it, I mean, we've had the opportunity to work with things and also recruit out of them. And, this idea of culture around building and fixing and hacking is really, truly special. And there's so many companies that try to replicate that at their own scale. But I mean, I don't think people realize, the general consumer of knowledge don't realize how important the FANG culture is, Facebook very much included. And we have products that were built because those companies exist.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, we have processes that are built because those companies exist, because no one had ever seen anything that dynamic at scale before. There was nothing like it in the corporate environment. And so it's really, I mean, that is why the Silicon Valley is the Silicon Valley, is a lot because of these companies, eBay's being the first of them. Mm-hmm. And then they, move on from there, the Cisco's of the world, where they're, it's just amazing when you start looking at I'm a history major, I'm a dork around that. So such a history nerd, but I love that aspect of it. And you really now see it with, leaders like Betsy and those that have, even before her and after, coming from those environments, are really uniquely set up in a totally different mindset. So I just wanted to point that out. So
it's interesting that you say that, because when you're going through, when you're in those roles and those environments, it's just what you do. That's exactly the job. That's the culture. It's only when you leave and maybe you go to another, in my case, another city, and another company, and then you go, wow, that was a really interesting and special experience. And now, it's been many years since I was at Facebook. We're probably, hitting year 8, 9. But I still have very fond memories. I still have connections with people there. And sometimes we will talk and say, out here in the real world, nobody is doing X. I think a lot of people actually struggle when they leave these FANGs where you have custom built tooling, because for a long time, it took me a while to learn AWS because Facebook had its own cloud internal cloud, right? Or even just some of very basic tools like Slack, which now, everyone uses, but Facebook had Workplace. And it took me a long time to figure out how to operate outside of the environment where things were, homebrew or custom made for that environment. It can be a really interesting, sometimes challenging experience.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to watch how that transpires. So, sorry, Son, I kind of cut you off there.
No, this is a fascinating conversation. And the one thing that I'm curious about, because you touched on it a bit in the performance reviews, because I often think, well, if you're going to, a lot of companies, and we mentioned marketing earlier, right? Marketing today has become not so much about how we present ourselves. I'm talking security vendors here primarily. Not so much how we present ourselves to the market. It's how many leads can we generate, and how do we measure that? And I think security generally, I'm generalizing here, but security has become some of that as well. How do we measure things to the fine point of technology and data? Are our teams successful? And in your example, it may not directly relate to fewer attacks, fewer breaches, quicker time to respond, less downtime. I don't know maybe it does, and then that's kind of my question. But how do you support that culture and enable that creativity and innovation and being part of the organization, not separate from it, and also demonstrate in some way that you're successful?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think it plagues a lot of us in security. It's a very recurring conversation. You mentioned, Sean, you're in a number of security groups. It's what are we sharing with our board? What are you managing? What sort of metrics are you looking at the team level, at the org level, department level? And so I don't know if there's no one size fits all. Going back to the whole performance piece, I think there's work that is just keep the lights on. We know that we have to do, whether it's vuln management or some of the like processes. There's work that it just has to be done. It's keep the lights on. And then there's the transformative work, which is the 2-3 years from now, we're going to need this thing. So I'm going to spend some time thinking about it now. And sometimes, depending on the size of a team, depending on the environment or whether it's highly regulated, it could be that you don't have enough time to focus on those strategic things. But those are the more transformational initiatives. And so I think we in security live in this constant, sometimes I call it like a Tasmanian devil, where I'm just going around going, oh, this thing happened, and that thing happened, that thing happened. And it's hard to block out all that noise and say, our head of sales said we're going to expand into this geographic market, and here are some of the challenging issues that we might face. And just having to build that time. So as a lead, I spent most of my time trying to help the team focus on what are the 2 to 3 things we need to get right now, highly prioritize those. And then let's not burn ourselves out on these other red herrings. And there's plenty of them in security. You have to do it every morning. If you open up your Slack or open up your browser, there's been so many stories, and that can really start to wear on you. So half the battle is just going, this stuff is happening over here. It's not really a big of a deal. And it's hard to sometimes draw the line, because in security, everything can go from being a small issue to blowing up. Sometimes it's perception, sometimes it's real. And so it really, you have to have that stomach to say, no, I don't care that we don't have this tool implemented right now. We're going to focus on identity and access management because that's the most important thing we have to get to. We have to get right today. And it's a constant reframing. So we used to joke when I was at Chainalysis that we would, do annual planning, but it was really, it was let's look at the next, month or two, and then reassess and constantly keep in communication about what we need to focus on and deliver on.
Monthly annual planning.
Yeah,
basically.
By the way, to translate that, but that was great, Betsy. It's great insight. This is the superpower of the CISO and to the CIO to an extent, right? It's being so confident and knowing the muscle memory so well of the blocking and tackling items that are your day job that you can focus in on orchestrating, getting the right level of resources, right level of detail, so that you can actually focus on those red herrings in a way that you can provide digestible data back to the decision makers for impact to occur on the other side of it. So it's like you're so strong and so able-bodied and confident on fixing the 70% that focus now is on the 30% of the things that come at you, and you have to figure out a business solution to it. That's the sign of an incredible CISO. It's where most people struggle. They focus on the first part first, and they get things overcomplicated. And then the business is like, I don't understand what you're trying to do. I have all these other big things I'm trying to solve, but you're focused on these things. And I hear this complaint all the time. And so I think it's just, it's really fun to hear it kind of regurgitated back from, this is how a CISO succeeds. So for those listening out there, this is how it works.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation you had there. The way I think of it is, it's like when you're an investor. I don't know if people listening are into. I watch a lot of CNBC talking heads, but it's almost if you have a thesis, right, about what you're going to invest in, then it's very easy to block out the noise. Iran attacked Israel, and so all the stocks have gone down, and now I need to go sell. Like, that's how it feels when you're in some of these environments. And so having a very strong, here's my plan, and we're going to focus on these three things. And when this happens, then we can change direction, right? There has to be a specific catalyst for that to happen. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to sell my stocks. I'm not going to sell my stocks out of fear and greed. But again, it's the reason I say it reminds you of that because it's a very emotional process as well. Mm-hmm. Your job could be on the line, your company, your reputation. So a lot of is at stake when you're making some of these calls. And you also have a budget and people, as a security lead or a CIO, you have this budget and you have people who are relying on you and have trusted you with their careers. So carrying the weight of all of that and making decisions as to where to deploy these resources, having a strong thesis and believing it and testing it. And also I think this is why some of these CISO communities are so powerful, or CIO communities, because going it alone is impossible.
Exactly. Yeah.
You need somebody to validate, that yes, you're not off the rocker here. Like, this is a good plan. I did this. So there's a lot of, I'm very thankful to a lot of fellow CISOs who sometimes have just, been struggling with a decision, but just hearing somebody else, just even if it's just a very, that you're on the right path, can help you show up better in the workplace.
Yeah, it does make that community, CIOs included, but CISOs are the most collaborative executive I've ever seen. CFOs are not getting together and be like, hey, what's working out for you, Betsy? Hey, what's not? VP sales are not doing that. Heads of products are not. I mean, they have smaller communities. I'm not saying that they're void of that. There's nothing like the CISO community. It works both to the advantages of companies and the disadvantages of companies, by the way. If you have the wrong narrative out there about your search, for instance, that's not going to go over well in the community. But it is pretty incredible. So, and by the way, I know we're sensitive to time. I know we wanted to get into the CIO CISO convergence where we started. So I can steer us back there. We'd love to hear.
Go for it, Michael. You want me to steer it? I'll take it from here.
You go ahead and steer. It's your ship.
My turn. Woo. Yeah. So I think we all had slightly different perspectives on the relationship between CIO and CSO, and we talk about the groups being separate. I don't know, are there combined CIO, CSO communities that join forces? I guess the big question, Betsy, is kind of what's your view of that relationship? How have you seen it succeed in examples that you've been part of? And I think those two things to start.
Yeah, no, that's great. How have I seen it succeed? So I'll give you an example from my two previous roles. As you mentioned earlier, when I was at Butterfly, I owned both the IT and the security functions. Now, at the time, this was a small startup, so we didn't have this ginormous budget. But what I was, so I got the chance to bring in a director of IT, and what was very important for me is making sure that the person that I brought in actually understood security and understood. So in my search for that leader for that function, I over-indexed because I knew at the time that I was at that company, the challenges that we had were more of a security bent versus a if I'm putting on a CIO hat, your main role is to make sure that organizations can reach their goals through technology, and you're enabling them. When I joined Butterfly, my main mandate or my main function was to ensure that we could scale out the business geographically, but the main focus was not on what technology we're going to bring in to help enable, because it was a startup. And so they had, your basic startup package. And so I knew it was going to be a long time until we needed to invest heavier in the CIO side of the house and and building out operations and scaling those out. And so that's, in that situation, the person that I brought in was actually very, I think at the time, the IAM we were using, they were very familiar with it. They had deployed it somewhere else. And so they knew all the pitfalls, and it felt like a very natural fit. And so I think depending on the company and the size and where they are on their journey, it makes a difference of whether you want to have one leader or have two leaders. Now, if you're in a broader, giant organization, there's more than enough work for two leaders. And so I'll tell you what I did when I got to Chainalysis. Very similar as when I started off at Butterfly, where I brought in a director, because at the time it was, okay, we already have our starter pack of applications, and everything is SaaS, right? There's no on-prem. But as I noticed the portfolio of applications starting to get bigger, and some of the business processes that we were building out, hire to retire, order to cash, procure to pay. Now you're starting to get to the point where you need to have somebody who understands how to build out and in what order, and to sit with your sales leaders and sit with your HR leaders. And I quickly looked around and realized that in order for us to meet the goals that we had for Chainalysis, that I needed to bring in a more strategic leader. I can do blocking and tackling, all day, every day. You have me deploy Workday, I will do it. I don't know if it's going to work beyond the first 6 months that I set it up, but it will be done. But I knew in order for us to get to that next level and our scale goals, that we needed somebody strategic. And so I actually made the case, and I hired equivalent of a CIO there, and actually Michael helped with that search. And so, brought in a really incredible person who was able to, have these conversations that I couldn't have, because I just don't have that background. And so there is a specific skill set, and very, very much so on the CIO side, is from my observation, helping to build out operational processes, helping to sit down and talk to business leaders to say, what are our next 2 to 3 year plans, and how can I help with, how can I bring, what technology can I bring in to help us to meet those goals? And then figure out what some of the pitfalls might be of making the wrong call. So there's, I think, these two roles, depending on where the company is or along the journey or the size, there's room for two strategic people, but they have to work together because there's a gray area. I feel like every company or every time I'm talking to a CISO, there's like, security should own Okta or whatever, insert IAM name here. Or security really should own a subset of these operations because they're so critical to the mission, and the mission is to protect the company. And so I think it really depends. That is probably one of the most important relationships is the CIO and the CISO. The other important relationship is the CISO and the CTO. And the same conversation we're having here about enterprise IT and enterprise security, or most people refer to as corporate security, I think you can have the same discussion about application or product security, and where do you draw the lines between what the CTO is responsible for and what the CISO is responsible for. And so I think that's one of the things that makes the CISO role so complex, is that it can look very different in every company. And there is no, you bring me a CFO, you bring me a CMO, I kind of know what I'm getting into. If you bring me a CISO, it's like, well, are you a technical CISO? Are you a GRC CISO? Are you an IT? So there's all of these flavors, and that's fine. That's just where we are in an industry and what's worked. I suspect, 50 years from now, when another Michael, Sean, and Betsy are sitting to talk about this, things will be very different, and maybe there'll be, a track, and there'll be, this is what a CISO means. This is what it means to have a CISO in your executive team, and here are the licenses that they need, and maybe we'll see some more standardization. I don't know, but for now, we're in this stage where it's a very fluid role depending on what industry or what company you're talking about.
So I've had this dream and thought, and I think I may have found the guest that's actually lived the dream. We'll see. That security isn't just about the blocking and tackling and the filling the holes and mitigating the risk and delivering data to audits to prove that they did things a certain way, but instead have an opportunity to define the business. And I see that in either if they own it themselves or work hand in hand with the CIO and CTO, where we could say, what are we trying to accomplish as a business, and how do we securely get there? Versus somebody going off and buying a tech stack and customizing it with some app layer, and then security gets brought in to do the vuln assessments and all the policies and stuff around it. Yeah. I have this vision and dream that's the other is possible, that we can actually lead things. So Michael, Betsy, both of you, thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to make a point that, my experience, you have two different organizations that enable that level of behavior. It's one that either saw the foresight of hiring and bringing on someone like Betsy, who can again look beyond and say, what's the business looking to do, and have those conversations, be highly collaborative, and be proactive about it. That is definitely in the minority of the companies that do that, because they have not enabled an environment where that individual came in. What the majority of the environments are is the oh no stage of, we've now hit a wall and the business is unfolding to a place where we now have a very specific acute pain point to visit the emergency room, and now I have to hire that kind of person, and it becomes a forced function. And that's kind of where we are. As again, it's the maturity model of, what does the CISO even do? If more companies understood that there were CISOs that have this amazing skill set, and a blended skill set like a Betsy, like others that are out there, we would get to that point a lot faster. And by the way, I'm not rushing everyone, because this chaos and everything is why we're even in business. But it's going to take a long time to fix it, right? We don't get called for the easy ones. We get called in this all happened with my business, and now I have to get this person in here that's like this magician in every single area. And then you realize, okay, that's really hard because the culture wasn't there to support it. So now we have to understand if the culture is there to support it. But it is wonderful to hear that there are companies that saw this in advance and say, hey, look, we really need to bring in this level of this individual. Yeah, it might be an overhire this month, but guarantee next month this value is going to pay for itself tenfold. So that's what we see.
Yeah. And actually, that was a big reason why I left. Butterfly is a great company, great product. But when I had a chance to sit with the CEO of Chain Analysis, Michael Groniger, and he described the challenges that he was facing in building the company, and he understood the role of security. Mm-hmm. He has a background as an engineer, and so maybe it was a little bit easier in the sense that he's just not 100% business focused, but he also technical background. But that was a key reason why, because what I didn't want to do was leave a role and then go into an environment where, you've been brought in to build out this organization, but there's no budget to do the things that you want to do. So that was one of the things that I was very open about in the interview process. And I see your vision, I understand your vision, I'm bought in. You don't have to sell me on the company. But what I do need to hear from you is about how this will be resourced. And we have a growth path here. We're going to bring these number of employees in. And I think it was easier having lived, hyper growth. So I understand, at some point it's like, there's somebody who described this really well, an ex-Facebooker, I forget their name, but it's when you're in a startup, all of a sudden you've got your Legos and you're building your Legos. And then all of a sudden, you start bringing more people into the organization and you don't want to share your Legos. And then things start to break down because now you have all these people who have been, brought into the company, but they cannot contribute because, people are holding on tightly. I said, I'm not going to be that person. I just want to make sure that there's, enough Legos and that we've planned for what the future of the company looks like. So again, it's a confluence of events, but I think, it's not a standard way of thinking because it can be very expensive, as Michael said it, earlier. Not everyone has the budget to bring in a security executive. Not everyone is ready to have a security executive in the conference room or in the boardroom because we're often the people, as a counterweight. I always find it interesting, when I talk to people who are in marketing or sales, because we see the world very differently. Where they see opportunity, I'm with the lawyers going, but this could happen and that could happen, and so it can, if you get the wrong person in that room, it could also hamper or slow down growth. So it's a very difficult, sometimes can be a difficult process when you're bringing in another risk manager. Into that conversation.
Yeah, I feel like a buzzkill half the time I'm talking to clients because I'm like, well, what are we doing in here? Where's the risk mitigation here? They're like, oh yeah, we haven't gotten that. Well, what about here? What about? They're like, why are you showing me all my vulnerabilities? It's like,
right, exactly.
Because I'm doing it nicely, but the candidate is going to come in is probably not going to be so. They're going to be pretty blatant, about what's going on here, and probably won't join your organization if you don't even know where the vulnerabilities are. And here's this, dummy recruiter out here doing it. It's like, no, it's great. I love the way you position that. That was really interesting. So.
It's a super, super fun conversation. I don't want to let you go.
I know. I could talk another hour.
It could be hours.
But we are at the marking point here. I'm going to leave this one question for you, and then Michael can do the final closing with his thoughts. If there's one thing you think we need to do, Betsy, to redefine cybersecurity for the next couple of years, what would that be?
Oh my goodness.
It's an easy question.
right? If I knew the answer to that, I would be probably fairly wealthy right now on a beach. When I think about where we are in terms of technology growth, and I think about everything that's happening now and is going to happen over the next 10 years, I'm talking about, we started off with social, mobile, cloud, big data. Now we're talking about AI. We're talking about EVs. We're talking about IoT, robotics, biotech. We're seeing a lot of really interesting disruption. I haven't even talked about AGI, but I also don't know what artificial general intelligence really is. I don't think anybody does at this point. But all of these things are happening, and we're in a really, I think, interesting time. We'll look back at this in history, and maybe Michael will write a book about it. But there's an opportunity for security folks to step up and help to lead some of these conversations, because sometimes I think if you look at a problem hard enough, it can become a security problem. So when COVID hit, we had to figure out how to get people to work securely from their homes. And so if there was anything we could do, going back to your question, I think it's more of just trust our security leaders and listen and give them an opportunity. If there's somebody here who's listening and, you're a C-level and you've got security folks in your org, we tend to sometimes, maybe we can overthink the bad things that are going to happen. But even within that space, there's a grain of truth that we should be confronting around all of these technologies that are going to change the way we live, the way our children live. And so a lot of the security people I know are very passionate about what they do. It's a hard job, but it's a noble job, because at the end of the day, you have a real world impact. And so I just, talked a lot there. I don't know if there's anything more I can say there, but it's more of just, listen and resource these teams.
Yeah, I'll answer your question, Sean. Or at least I'll give you an answer of how to get 80% of the way there. And actually, Betsy just said it. 4 things. One, remember that everyone has something going on, right? And it's probably bad. Or there's things that are bad in people's lives. 2, there's things that have happened and their experiences that shape the way that their decisions are being made. Biases and things. That's just human nature. It's what makes us human, right? 3, just listen to everyone, right? I think we'll be a much better security community, and the community that works with the security leaders, if we just all listen to one another, and don't let our egos get in the way, would be the last thing. I think there's a lot still out there. There's a lot of people that think they know more than others and need to show it all the time. And it's just, just connecting on a human level. I think it sounds kind of hokey, but that'll get us 80% of the way there, because the world's getting more complex. It's getting more serious. Mm-hmm. We just have to all listen to one another. Like pandemic was a great example. We got so much, we progressed so much further in security because there was this desire to listen to the few people in the organization that knew what they were doing. And there was a lot of progression. And I feel like we've kind of slid backwards a little bit here, but it's there. I mean, the proof is there. So anyway, that's my philosophical words of the day.
I agree, 100%. Plus one.
Yeah, this was such a pleasure. I've been wanting to do this with Betsy and yourself for a long time. So thanks for having us, Sean. This is great.
Thank you both. Fantastic conversation, and hopefully people do number 3, listen to this, and embrace each other. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. You're welcome back anytime, Betsy, of course, and Michael. Looking forward to the next one we get scheduled as part of the CISO Circuit Series. Great. And thanks everybody for listening, watching. Please do comment, share, subscribe, follow Betsy, follow Michael, and we'll see you on the next Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast.
Thank you. Be well.
Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.